Rome's empire wasn't funded by noble citizens or efficient bureaucrats. It was financed by private contractors who bought the right to squeeze taxes out of entire provinces and often made fortunes while the empire itself struggled to survive. The Roman state, which conquered the Mediterranean and ruled millions, had no professional tax collectors, no internal revenue service, no bureaucratic machinery to extract wealth from its own provinces. Instead, it relied on a system so corrupt, so exploitative, so nakedly profit-driven that it would scandalize modern sensibilities, yet it worked for centuries. How did one of the most corrupt, abusive, and exploitative financial systems in history become the very mechanism that kept the Roman state functioning? The answer lies in the 2nd century BC, when Rome defeated Carthage and suddenly found itself controlling vast overseas territories. Sicily, Sardinia, Spain, North Africa. These were not Italian lands with Italian traditions. They were conquered provinces filled with people who spoke different languages and worshipped different gods. Rome faced a problem: how to extract revenue from these new possessions without building an expensive administrative apparatus to manage them. The solution was the Publicani, private financiers who bid for the right to collect taxes in Roman provinces. The mechanism was elegant in its simplicity and brutal in its execution. First, Roman census estimated how much tax a given province should produce in a year, based on its population, resources, and economic activity. Then, wealthy syndicates of Roman financiers, often drawn from the equestrian class, gathered to bid for the right to collect that tax. The highest bidder paid the Roman treasury the full amount up front, providing the state with immediate cash regardless of actual collections. In exchange, that syndicate received the legal authority to travel to the province and extract taxes from its inhabitants. And here was the key: whatever they collected above the amount they had paid to Rome, they kept as profit. If a syndicate bid 1 million denarii for the right to collect taxes in a province, and then extracted 2 million from the provincial population, they pocketed the difference. The state got its money immediately, without administrative costs, without risk, without having to manage the messy business of collection. The collectors gained near total financial power over entire regions, with the full backing of Roman law and Roman legions. Rome had effectively outsourced oppression to private enterprise. The system spread rapidly across the empire as Rome conquered new territories in the east and west. Asia Minor, Syria Gallage, new province, became a potential source of profit for the Publicani, who could secure the tax contract. Provincial populations, already subjects of a foreign power, now faced private collectors whose only incentive was maximum extraction. There was no limit on what the Publicani could take, no oversight beyond the distant authority of Roman governors who were often complicit in the exploitation. The Publicani didn't just collect taxes. They lent money at usurious rates to communities that couldn't pay, then collected debts with interest. They seized land, enslaved defaulters, and extracted labor from those who could not pay in coin. They operated as banks, moneylenders, and enforcers, combining all the functions of a financial system into a single predatory machine. Roman elites grew fabulously rich from provincial exploitation. Senators and equestrians invested in Publicani syndicates, sharing in the profits. The system turned tax collection into a speculative financial market, with shares in syndicates traded in Rome like stocks in a modern exchange. Local populations sank deeper into debt, their economies distorted by the relentless pressure of extraction. Revolts increased. Communities that could not pay often rose in desperate rebellion, only to be crushed by Roman legions and punished with even harsher terms. Provincial governors, appointed by the Senate to administer justice, became both referees and Some tried to restrain the worst abuses, but many were themselves investors in Publicani syndicates or recipients of their bribes. The system was corrupt by design, built on incentives that rewarded exploitation and punished restraint. And yet, despite all this, the Publicani system kept the Roman state functioning for centuries. Here is the irony that the outline captures. As corruption deepened, state revenue became more stable. Rome didn't need to worry about bad harvests, economic downturns, or collection difficulties in distant provinces. The Publicani bore that risk. If a province produced less than expected, the syndicate lost money, not the state. If a community couldn't pay, the Publicani had to find other ways to extract value, through debt, labor, or seized assets. The state's revenue was guaranteed, predictable, and delivered up front, regardless of conditions on the ground. Rome was effectively transferring the risk of tax collection to private actors who were highly motivated to overcome any obstacle. And motivated they were. The Publicani were not government employees with fixed salaries. They were entrepreneurs whose profits depended on their ability to extract. They developed sophisticated methods of assessment, collection, and enforcement that no Roman bureaucracy could have matched. They knew the local economies, the wealthy families, the vulnerable communities. They knew who could pay and how much they could be forced to give. Profit incentives drove them to be more efficient, more autorog, more relentless than any state official would ever have been. This is the dark genius of the Publicani system. It aligned private greed with public revenue. The Publicani enriched themselves, but in doing so, they also enriched Rome. The state got its money. The elites got their profits. The provincials got squeezed, and the empire kept expanding. For centuries, this arrangement worked well enough that Rome never felt compelled to replace it. Only under Augustus, when the Republic gave way to the empire, did the system begin to change. Augustus, consolidating power after decades of civil war, recognized that the Publicani system was politically provincial revolts fueled by exploitation threatened imperial control. The tax farmers' abuses generated resentment that undermined Roman authority. Augustus gradually replaced the Publicani with a professional civil service, salaried officials directly accountable to the emperor. Egypt, the empire's wealthiest province, was placed under imperial control with a rigorous administrative apparatus that collected taxes directly. Other provinces followed, though the transition took decades and was never fully complete. By the end of the 1st century AD, the Publicani had been largely superseded by state employees. But the system had already done its work. It had funded Roman expansion for 200 years, financing the conquest that made the empire possible. The Publicani built Rome's financial foundation, even as they bled its provinces dry. Today, the mechanisms have changed, but the logic remains disturbingly familiar. Modern governments rarely sell entire provinces to private contractors, but they outsource countless functions that were once state responsibilities. Private prisons house inmates for profit, creating incentives to maximize occupancy and minimize costs. Toll roads are built and operated by private companies that collect fees guaranteed by the state. Student loans are serviced by private contractors who profit from fees and penalties. Debt collection agencies buy portfolios of defaulted obligations and extract payments from those who cannot pay. Defense contractors build weapons, maintain bases, and even provide security services in war zones, all for profit. The logic is identical to the Publicani system. Transfer risk to private actors, guarantee state income or services, and let profit incentives handle enforcement. The problems are the same too. Private prisons lobby for longer sentences. Debt collectors harass the vulnerable. Contractors cut corners to maximize returns. And the state, having outsourced the dirty work, can claim distance from the worst abuses while still benefiting from the revenue or services provided. The Publicani would recognize this world instantly. The names have changed, but the game remains. States don't always choose the fairest or most moral systems. They choose the ones that guarantee survival. When Rome faced the challenge of administering a vast empire without a professional bureaucracy, it chose the path of least resistance. It outsourced the hard, ugly work of extraction to those willing to do it for profit. And for centuries, that choice worked. The empire grew rich. The state grew strong. The system held, but it also created the conditions for its own replacement. The abuses of the Publicani fueled the resentments that destabilized the late Republic. The very efficiency of private extraction generated political costs that eventually had to be paid. Augustus didn't replace the Publicani out of moral outrage. He replaced them because the political stability of the empire required it. The Publicani were victims of their own success. They extracted so effectively that they made themselves politically unsustainable. This is the pattern that repeats across history. Systems built on exploitation eventually generate the resistance that undermines them. The Publicani system worked until it didn't. And when it stopped working, Rome built something new. But the underlying principle that states will outsource difficult, dangerous, or dirty work to private actors when it serves their interests has never disappeared. It is still with us, embedded in the architecture of modern governance. Private contractors still collect what the state is owed. Private companies still manage what the state owns. Private firms still do what the state prefers not to do itself. And the profit motive still drives them to extract, to enforce, to optimize in ways that no bureaucracy ever could. Rome didn't just conquer its provinces with legions. It financed its empire by selling the right to squeeze them dry. And that logic, outsourcing state power to private profit, has proven too useful for any government to abandon entirely. If you want to understand the hidden systems that still shape our world, the private contractors who do the state's dirty work, the profit incentives that drive public policy, then hit subscribe. Because the Publicani are still with us. They just have different names now.